Hello, my name is James Brimwell, and here is my presentation for the Undergraduate Research Symposium on developing a biochar composite suitable for the blown film process. My mentor is Professor Carlos Diaz. The blown film process is a method of making a plastic film that utilizes air to make the extruded polymer into a bubble before it is cooled and rolled. The benefit of this process is that it stretches the material in the machine direction and the cross direction. This increases the material's mechanical strength. The picture on the left is for your reference about which direction is which. Biochar is made from a process called thermochemical degradation. This process is outlined on the right. A feedstock that is made out of a biomass goes through a process called pyrolysis. This process uses high heat in the absence of oxygen to break down the biomass into biochar. The biochar that is produced is high in carbon. What makes biochar such an exciting material is that it diverts waste from the landfill, is bio-based, and is carbon negative since it sequesters carbon. Biochar also provides several benefits to agriculture through soil amendment. Biochar has been shown to make the soil less dense, increase the soil pH, and decrease the use of fertilizers. All of these factors help the growth of plants. This is shown in a research paper on the effects of biochar on semi-arid soils, but has also been shown to have similar effects on other types of soils. The application that is the motivation for our research is in mulching films. We want to create a bio-based film that is more sustainable than other options and promotes upcycling through its use of biochar. Upcycling is the process of transforming waste materials into a new material and product that has better quality and is better for the environment. For my research, I have several goals that need to be reached in order to create a blown film material. I need to understand biochar's relationship to viscosity, melt flow index, and melt stretch. The melt flow index is a measure of how quickly a material flows when it is melted. This is inversely proportional to the material's viscosity. Taking this understanding of the effects of biochar, I can develop a formulation that will be suitable for the blown film line. The materials that are being targeted in this formulation are all bio-based. The main component of this formulation is called polycaprolactone, kappa 6800, which we will refer to as PCL, cornstarch, and biochar made from coffee grounds. In order to make a quality blown film, we had some target properties to reach. These target properties are based on LDPE, which is one of the best materials to use in the blown film process. This is because it has a good melt flow index, can easily be stretched when it is melted, and gets stronger as it is stretched. LDPE NA345013 was used as a benchmark. This version is meant for use in a blown film process. It has a melt flow rate of 1.8 grams per 10 minute, equilibrium torque of 14.2 Newton meters. Another target property was that the film should be black. The black color will make the mulching film good for weed control and heating the soil. The black color will come from the biochar. In the past, the color would have come from a filler called carbon black, but this material is not bio-based. In order to make the samples, we took the materials and used a machine called a Brabender to mix the components together. The Brabender is pictured on the bottom left. The Brabender is a high shear melt mixer, which means that it can mix the separate components together into one homogeneous mixture. The Brabender also provides the torque information for that material. The next step is to use the carver to press the samples into a flat disc that we refer to as a pancake. This allows the material to be easier to work with. Then I take the pancake and cut off and pelletize 5 grams of material so it can be used in the extrusion plastometer. This machine allows me to calculate the melt flow index for each sample. I also was able to perform a melt stretch test from this machine by letting the material flow and then using 2 tongs. I would grab the melted material and stretch it apart. I performed a similar melt stretch test by using a hot plate. With this test, I tried to control more of the variables. More on this test later on. On the left is the torque graph based on the material. The leftmost column has LDPE, the target material. From this graph, we can see that when the formulation had 40% PCL, it had a very high equilibrium torque. As the amount of PCL increased, the equilibrium torque also decreased. If we look at the 4th column compared to the 5th and 6th column, we see that as the amount of biochar is increased, the higher the torque of the material, and as the biochar decreased, the less torque there was. The image on the right is a screenshot of the information that is given by the Brabender. The line in blue shows the torque versus time, and the line in red shows the temperature versus time. The equilibrium torque is the point at the end of the graph where the blue line, the torque line, evens out. Next, we look at the material's viscosity through the melt flow index of the formulations. As the amount of PCl in the material increases, we can see that its melt flow index also increases. However, when more biochar is added, the melt flow index remains relatively the same. If we look at what happens when more starch is added, we can see that the melt flow index increases, as it does in the last bar in the graph. To test the melt stretch of the materials, I first would pull apart the material coming from the plastometer to see if it would stretch. Then I came up with a way to standardize this test for the samples that showed some promising results. The video is of me performing this test. I cut an inch-long sample from the extrusion plastometer. Then I heated it using a hot plate, and then using 2 tongs, I slowly pulled apart the material. Then I recorded the length of this material. The formulation with only 5% biochar performed the best, as can be seen in the bar graph. Here's a visualization of the melt stretch results. Here you can compare the length of the 60% PCl, 35% starch, 5% biochar with the LDPE and the 60% PCl, 35% biochar, 5% starch. The conclusions that we can draw from these tests is that the biochar increases the viscosity of the material. This can be seen in the torques and in the melt flow indexes. The 60% PCl, 35% starch, and 5% biochar performed the best in terms of viscosity and melt stretch, being similar to that of LDPE. Increasing the amounts of PCl would probably improve the properties of this formulation, but PCl is a relatively expensive material, and we do not want to create an expensive film. 60% PCl, 35% starch, and 5% biochar is overall the best formulation that we have. It is okay that it did not meet all the benchmarks of LDPE, since there are other materials that can be made into a blown film that have properties similar to our formulation. The 60% PCl, 35% starch, and 5% biochar had a melt flow rate of 0.8 grams per 10 minute, a torque of 19 Newton meters, and a melt stretch of 28 inches. The next step is to scale up for production for the blown film line. I'm going to make over 2 pounds of material in order to run it through the blown film line. The material needs to be pelletized in order to go through the blown film extruder. To do this, a single screw extruder will be utilized. However, since this machine has only one screw, it does not mix the material well. This machine has a laminar flow when it extrudes the material. This means that it is just pushing the material out when it is mixing it. In order to get a homogeneous mixture, master batches need to be used. To create a master batch, the Brabender will be used to mix the material since it is a high shear melt mixer. One master batch will be PCl and biochar, and the other will be PCl and starch. The master batches will be pressed in the carver and then pelletized, mixed and placed in the single screw extruder. The material will be extruded, cooled in the water bath, and then pelletized. Once there, it can be placed in the blown film line, where it will be extruded, and the properties will be optimized. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Please comment down below if you have any questions. Thank you, and have a good day.